This is Chapter 5, the integumentary system. The organs of the integumentary system include the skin and accessory structures like hair, nails, and glands, as well as blood vessels, muscles, and nerves that supply the skin. The integument is the cutaneous membrane that covers the outer surface of the body. So these are all names for the skin: the integument, the cutaneous membrane, skin. It's the largest organ by surface area and weight, and if you measured it flattened out, it would be about 22 square feet and weighs about 10 to 11 pounds, 16% of body weight or so. It can be very thin or very thick, anywhere from 0.5 millimeter to 4 millimeters thick, depending on where in the body you're talking about. We lose almost 1 kilogram of skin epithelium a year, and this becomes a major part of household dust. Besides protection, the skin contributes to regulation of body temperature, sensory perception, synthesis of vitamin D, and emotional expression, and it also serves as an important reservoir of blood. There are 2 major layers in the skin. The outer is the epidermis, so this is the superficial or outer layer, and it consists of epithelial tissue. The dermis is the deeper layer, and it consists of connective tissue. Now the subcutaneous layer, or sub-Q, also called the hypodermis, it's located beneath the dermis, and it's not considered part of the skin. The skin is the epidermis and the dermis, and these rest on the hypodermis. It's a foundation for the skin, and it is largely loose connective tissue, areolar and adipose, and it attaches the skin to underlying tissues and organs. And here you can see a diagram of the skin, and you can see uppermost the epidermis, then deep to that is the dermis, and down here, this very fatty layer, is the subcutaneous layer. The epidermis is composed of keratinized or keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, which contains 4 major types of cells. There are the keratinocytes that you can see up here in the upper left corner, melanocytes, Langerhans cells, also called intraepidermal macrophages, and Merkel cells, or tactile epithelial cells. Let's talk about these 4 cell types. The keratinocytes are about 90% of the cells. They produce the protein keratin, which is a tough, fibrous protein that provides protection. Melanocytes produce the pigment melanin that protects against damage by UV radiation. Langerhans cells are macrophages that originated in the red bone marrow. They then travel to the integument, and they are involved in immune responses. And Merkel cells, which are always associated with nerve endings called Merkel discs, and these detect light touch and pressure. The epidermis is composed of 4 layers in thin skin and 5 layers in thick skin. So we're going to name these 5 layers, and then we'll talk about where you find what. The stratum basale, also called the stratum germinativum, is the bottom or deepest layer. There's continuous cell division here. It's a single layer of epithelial cells sitting on a basement membrane, and these cells are attached to that basement membrane by hemidesmosomes. It is superficial to the dermis. So the stratum basale is the basal layer, the bottom or deepest layer. It's also called the stratum germinativum because cells here are constantly dividing. They're acting as germ cells or stem cells. Above that, as we go superficially, we have the stratum spinosum, about 8 to 10 layers of keratinocytes. Cell division might occur in the deeper layers, but not in the more superficial layers. The cells are connected to each other by desmosomes. Keratin filaments of the cytoskeleton insert into those desmosomes. So we're starting to see keratin. And one thing to keep in mind here is that keratin is an epithelioprotein. It is made by epithelial cells. We've talked in the past about collagen being the most abundant protein fiber in the body, but collagen is made by connective tissue. Then, superficial to the stratum spinosum, you have the stratum granulosum, 2 to 5 layers of cells filled with granules of keratohyalin, which is a protein that assembles intermediate filaments into keratin. And it also contains granules of lipid-filled lamellar bodies. Cells die, and programmed cell death is called apoptosis. But cells die as they move through this layer, and the lamellar granules discharge lipids outside the cells, and that helps to waterproof the skin. Superficial to that is the stratum lucidum, several layers of dead transparent cells, and it is only present in thick skin, the skin of the fingertips, palms, and soles of the feet. The most superficial stratum of epithelial cells is the stratum corneum. So again, it's the outermost, most superficial layer. It's composed of approximately 20 layers or more, depending on where it is, and what kind of pressures it's subject to, what kind of friction, etc. But these layers are composed of the flat remnants of dead keratinocytes filled with keratin protein. So they're basically just flat, dead bags of keratin. These cells are continuously shed and replaced by cells from deeper strata in a process called desquamation. So you're getting rid of these squamous cells. You're desquamating, desquamation. Keratinization is the process of accumulating more and more of the waxy protein keratin as the cells move from the deepest layer of the epidermis to the surface layer. The whole process usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks. Now, constant friction can stimulate the process and produce a callus, so this is a thicker buildup of keratinocytes in the stratum corneum. Dandruff is an excess of keratinized cells shed from the scalp. And psoriasis, what happens here is the keratinocytes divide very rapidly and are shed in as little as 7 to 10 days. So a process that usually takes 4 to 6 weeks here will take just about a week. And so here we can see our strata. This down here is our stratum basale sitting on a basement membrane. This is dermis underneath. And in the stratum basale, you can see there's a cell that's undergoing cell division. You can also see a melanocyte here and also a Merkel cell here. But the stratum basale is the single layer of basal cells. These cells, this layer here, are in the stratum spinosum, and it's called the stratum spinosum because the cells here look spiny or spiky. And that's because when you preserve tissue, you're removing the water so the cells shrink away from each other. But since they're all attached to each other by desmosomes, it makes them look really kind of spiky or spiny. Then superficial to that, we have the stratum granulosum, and here we have our lamellar granules, and they're going to be discharged into the spaces between the cells to waterproof the cell layers. It is in this layer that the cells die. So as they move through this layer, they're dead. They die, and the uppermost cells will be dead. Then we have the stratum lucidum, a few layers of very clear cells, only found in thick skin, and above that, the stratum corneum, so that's the most superficial layer. Many layers of dead, flat keratinocytes filled with keratin. And here you can see the figure, your stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and above it the stratum corneum. So we have several types of skin. Thin or hairy skin covers all body regions except the palms of your hands, the palmar surfaces of your digits, and also the soles of your feet. Thin skin lacks stratum lucidum, and it's also the only kind of skin that can grow hair. Thick skin cannot grow hair, and it covers the palms, palmar surfaces of the digits, and the soles. And so here we can see thick skin, and we can see very here's our stratum granulosum. Above that you see this kind of clear layer there, stratum lucidum, and the stratum corneum. Here is thin skin, and you do not see that stratum lucidum. we have our stratum granulosum and then our layers of dead peeling keratinocytes in the stratum corneum. If we look at skin pigments, melanin is produced by melanocytes in the stratum basale. There are several forms of melanin. The type and amount gives us differences in color. Freckles are clusters of concentrated melanin triggered by exposure to sunlight, and that is a genetic trait. The number of melanocytes is about the same in all people, but the amount of pigment produced and transferred to keratinocytes will differ. Melanin absorbs UV light. Exposure to UV light will both darken the amount of melanin that's there and also increase the amount of melanin that is made. Genetic factors, certain hormones, like in pregnancy and certain diseases, and exposure to UV light, which, as we said in the last slide, darkens melanin and increases its production. These factors determine how much melanin is produced. Keratin is also a pigment that can be deposited in the skin. It is not made by human beings. It is a plant pigment, and it's ingested through your diet, but it can accumulate in lipids and impart a yellowish color to the skin. And also blood. Blood imparts a reddish color, which deepens when blood flow near the surface of the skin increases, like when we blush or when we're angry, etc. If blood flow decreases near the surface of the skin looks pale, and a decrease in the oxygen content of the blood produces a bluish color. Just a few more things about skin pigments. Nevi or birthmarks or moles are chronic lesions of the skin, but they are by definition benign. Malignant melanoma is a cancer of melanocytes. So here you can see a normal mole. Notice it's got very regular border, it's uniform in color. But when you get malignant melanoma, you see a very irregular border. You see many shades of color within that area. So these are things to look for. We talked about the most superficial layer of the skin. Now let's talk about the deeper layer of the skin, the dermis, which is composed of connective tissue containing collagen and elastic fibers. It has two regions. The uppermost or most superficial region lies just below the basement membrane of the epidermis, and it consists of areolar connective tissue, and it has a lot of thin collagen and elastic fibers. Remember, these are connective tissue fibers, collagen and elastic. It also has dermal papillae. The papillary region is named for these bumps, or dermal papillae. And the dermal papillae include capillary loops, as you'll see when we look at the picture. Also, corpuscles of touch, so sensory receptors for touch, and free nerve endings, for example, sensory receptors for pain and temperature. The deeper layer of the dermis, which is by far the largest, is called the reticular region, and it consists of dense irregular connective tissue containing collagen and elastic fibers. Also, you may see adipose cells kind of scattered about. You also see hair follicles, nerves, sebaceous or oil glands, and sudoriferous sweat glands. There's a lot going on in the reticular region. Now, tears or excessive stretching in this region cause stretch marks called striae. Cleavage lines are tension lines in the skin. These are areas where the predominant direction of underlying collagens is all going in one direction. Okay, so our collagen fibers are going in all different directions, but in some areas they tend to go more in one direction than another. Plastic surgeons make their incisions parallel to normal cleavage lines, and this is to minimize scarring. It's very easy to close a wound which has been made along those cleavage lines. Epidermal ridges reflect contours of the underlying dermal papillae and form the basis for fingerprints and footprints. These function to increase the firmness of grip by increasing friction. And so in this slide, you can see parallel ridges, these epidermal ridges, excuse me. And these are formed when the papillae of the dermis underneath are aligned in parallel. Okay, and then the epidermis is draped over these parallel rows of papillae, and so it forms these epidermal ridges. And so let's look here. We already talked about the epidermis, so we know that it sits on a basement membrane. So just below, we have the dermis. Now these little bumps here that the epidermis is draped over are called papillae. And here you can see the epidermis is peeled away, so we can see our papillae there. So these papillae comprise the papillary region of the dermis. The rest of the dermis is the reticular region. Note the capillary loops and sensory receptors in the dermal papillae. And then in the dermis here, we can see hair follicles and various glands, lots of blood vessels. And again, here's the hypodermis or subcutaneous layer, not part of the skin. So we've talked about the hypodermis before, and again, it's not considered part of the skin, but it does attach the skin to underlying tissues and organs. It contains lots of blood vessels and nerves. It contains sensory receptors for touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. And down here you can see, here's another little corpuscle of touch. This is for deep touch. That's called a Pacinian corpuscle. Whereas the corpuscles up here are Meissner's corpuscles for light touch. And here you can, so you can see there's quite a bit going on in the hypodermis as well. It's composed of areolar connective tissue and adipose. Now, half the body's fat is in the hypodermis, and it serves as padding and insulation, and it gives us body shapes. And how much and where the fat is deposited accounts for many of the differences in shape between men and women. The skin contains different types of sensory receptors to differentiation between the different tactile or touch sensations. And those would include light touch, pressure, which is a deeper touch, vibration, itch, and tickle. These sensory receptors are found in different layers. Superficially, and we saw in the dermal papillae, we saw Merkel discs, which are associated with Merkel cells in the epidermis, and those detect light touch. We have free nerve endings in our papillae, detecting pain and temperature, Meissner corpuscles, light touch, and hair root plexuses, which also are sensors for light touch, and we'll discuss those in a little bit. In the deeper layers of your skin, we have Pacinian or lamellated corpuscles, and these are for deep touch and pressure. So if you look at our sensory receptors, well, this was the first one we talked about. Here is the Merkel cell in the epidermis, but the Merkel disc here is in the dermal papillae. Okay, so that's one sensory receptor. Here we can see some free nerve endings. The Meissner corpuscles or corpuscles of touch, and down here deeper we see the lamellated or Pacinian corpuscles. Now let's talk about the accessory structures of the skin. First of all, the hair, also called pili. Hair is present on most surfaces except the palms of the hands, anterior surfaces of the fingers, and the soles of the feet. And hair is composed of dead, keratinized epidermal cells. Genetics determines the thickness and distribution of that hair. Hair helps with touch sensations and also protects the body against the harmful effects of sun and against heat loss. Also, when you think about where hair is, hair can protect delicate structures like your eyebrows and eyelashes protecting your eyes. Hairs in your ear protect the ear, and we do have hair around some of the openings of our bodies. The parts of a hair include the shaft, which is above the skin surface. The root is below the level of the skin. A follicle penetrates into the dermis and includes an epidermal or an epithelial root sheath and a dermal root sheath. And then a bulb is the expanded end of the root and contains the hair matrix. These are epithelial cells that produce the hair, and they are basically identical to the stratum basale. So here you see a highly magnified view of hair, and this would be the surface of the skin. Most of the root and shaft of the hair consist of dead, keratinized epithelial cells arranged in 3 concentric layers. There's an inner core of the hair called the medulla, surrounded by the bulk of the hair, which is the cortex, and the cuticle is the outermost layer of cells that kind of overlap each other to form the hair surface, so they overlap like the shingles on a roof. And if we go back to this picture, you can see the cuticle cells overlapping on the outer surface of this hair. Each hair follicle is surrounded by a hair root plexus, which is a plexus of nerves that detect light touch. And also, there are arrector pili muscles. These are smooth muscle cells that extend from the dermal root sheath to the papillae of the dermis. And when they contract, they raise the hair and cause goosebumps. And so here we have our picture. This is a longitudinal section through the hair. And if all of this hair is below the surface of the skin, then it's the hair root. And so we can see here the hair from purple here to purple there. Everything outside of that would be the surrounding root sheath. At the base of every hair, we have a little hair papilla of the hair. It's a dermal papilla, and you can see sitting on it is a single layer of cells. These, again, are equivalent to stratum basale, but it's called the hair matrix here, and you can see scattered melanocytes within that single layer. So the hair papilla nourishes the hair matrix. And so the matrix consists of these rapidly dividing cells. As these cells get pushed up, they are going to get filled with keratin and die. If we take a cross section through this whole thing, from the purple on in, this is the hair, the medulla, the cortex, and then the purple cuticle. And then out here, immediately surrounding the hair, we have an epithelial root sheath, and this is the part that comes out when you pull a hair out by the roots. But then outside of that, you have a dermal root sheath. Here we can see the hair shaft, the hair root, the hair follicle with the expanded bulb. We can see where the papilla of the hair is poking up into the bottom of that. We also see this nerve plexus here around the bulb. That is the hair root plexus. Again, when you move the hair, just moving the hair slightly will stimulate this plexus, so you know that something is touching the hair. Here is our little arrector pili muscle. Again, when it contracts, it raises the hair and causes goosebumps. New hair is produced by the matrix, and it's nourished by the papilla of the hair. The cells grow, fill with keratin, then die. Cells are added at the base of the root. Hair grows in cycles. There's a growth period followed by a resting period. At the end of the resting period, the old hair is pushed out and replaced by a new one. And the length of the cycle depends on the type of hair. For example, eyelashes, maybe the growth cycle will be 30 days, whereas the hair on your head, the growth cycle could be years. Hair color is due to melanin produced by melanocytes in the matrix. Gray or white hair results from the fact that melanin production decreases with age and eventually may stop altogether. There are different types of hair. Before a baby is born, in the fetus, there's a very fine, non-pigmented, downy hair called lanugo. Covers the entire body of the fetus. Shortly before birth, lanugo is replaced by vellus hairs and terminal hairs. Vellus hairs cover most of the body of the baby. They're short, fine, pale hairs. They're barely visible to the naked eye. And then terminal hairs, which are long, coarse, heavily pigmented hairs. So when you think about the baby, when the baby's born, it's got eyebrows, some hair on its head, and eyelashes. At puberty, much of the vellus hairs of the body are replaced by terminal hairs. After puberty, about 35% of the hair on a female's body is terminal. On a male, it's 95%, with the rest of the body being still covered by vellus hairs. Hair color is determined by the amount and type of melanin. Now, if we look at skin glands, the first one we're going to talk about is this gland here, which is associated with the hair follicle. It secretes its product through a duct into that hair follicle. And these are sebaceous glands, oil glands. These are holocrine glands. So the whole cell ruptures and becomes part of the secretion. And the secretion is called sebum, which does two important things. It prevents dehydration of the hair and skin, and it also inhibits the growth of certain bacteria. However, other types of bacteria love the sebum, and it provides a medium for the growth of certain other types of bacteria. Sudoriferous glands or sweat glands. There are two types. Both are simple glands, but they're coiled tubular glands. The first type is called eccrine or merocrine sweat glands. These are the most numerous. They secrete the watery solution that's associated with temperature regulation. So this watery solution is secreted through a pore to the surface of the skin. It cools the body and eliminates small amounts of waste, although the amounts of waste are really negligible when you think about this function as compared to the kidney. But eccrine or merocrine sweat glands are functional at birth. They're found over most of the body, but most numerous in the soles of the feet and the palms of the hand. Eccrine sweat glands release sweat in response to an emotional stress such as fear or embarrassment. In addition to temperature regulation, this type of sweating is referred to as emotional sweating or cold sweat. But again, they're found over most of the body, they're functional at birth, their main role is in temperature regulation. On the other hand, we have apocrine sweat glands. These are located mainly in the skin of the axilla, which are your armpits, the groin, the areolae, which are around the nipples, and the bearded facial regions of adult males. The sweat here is much thicker, it's more viscous, it contains lipids and proteins, and much of body odor is due to bacterial growth in apocrine sweat. The duct here opens into the hair follicles. It has no role in thermoregulation, and they become functional only at puberty. So the function is unknown, but it does have a scent, but it may be a subliminal sign of sexual maturity. And apocrine sweat is also released in emotional sweating. So let's go back to our picture here. Now this is a coiled sweat gland. This is an eccrine sweat gland, and I can tell that because if you follow the duct, it goes right up to the surface of the skin. This is an apocrine sweat gland. If you follow the duct, it goes into the hair follicle. Other types of skin glands, ceruminous glands produce cerumen or earwax. These are modified sweat glands in the ear canal, and it provides a sticky barrier that helps to prevent the entry of foreign bodies into the ear canal. And mammary glands, which secrete milk. They are modified apocrine sweat glands. For another integumentary system structure, the nails. Nails are composed of hard, keratinized epidermal cells located over the dorsal surfaces of the distal ends of fingers and toes. Nail structures include a free end, here we go, our free edge hanging over the distal tip of the finger. This visible part of the nail is the nail body or nail plate, and there is a little whitish area at the proximal end of the nail body, which is roughly shaped like a half moon. It's called the lunula, and it is simply thicker here. The nail is thicker here, so you don't see through it as well to the pink tissue underneath, which is why it looks white. There is a nail root under the skin. Just like we had a hair root below the surface of the skin, our nail root is below the surface of the skin. Here we can see the cuticle, which is also called the eponychium. As we'll see in the next slide, there is a little thickened ridge of stratum corneum under the free edge of the nail body called the hyponychium. There we go. Nails grow like hair. There's a nail matrix that produces new cells. These cells fill with keratin and they die. Unlike hair, nails grow continuously, not in cycles. Here we see a longitudinal section through the finger. Once again, we can see the free edge, the nail body, the lunula, the nail root, and our eponychium. Here underneath you can see the hyponychium. And then of course we see our nail matrix, rapidly dividing cells that become filled with keratin as they push up and then they die. And if you're connected to the internet, you can click on the integumentary system video. Functions of the skin. First of all, thermoregulation. Blood vessels can dilate, and blood flowing near the surface of the skin can then transfer that heat from deeper tissues to the skin, and it helps the body to cool off. Also, sweating results in evaporative cooling. So we have sweat glands and blood vessels in the skin that are helping to thermoregulate. Blood reservoir. The skin has 8 to 10% of our total blood flow at rest. This blood, if it's needed somewhere else, can be mobilized. Protection. So many protective functions of the skin, it's almost hard to name them all. Skin is a barrier to water, so it helps prevent dehydration and waterlogging. Oil repels water, it lubricates the skin and hair, and it's bactericidal, or provides a harsh environment for certain types of bacteria to grow. Sweat has an acidic pH, and that's hostile to some bacteria. Melanin protects against UV light. DNA is very easily damaged by UV light, but the melanin absorbs that UV light and protects the nucleus. Langerhans cells and macrophages are part of the immune system. Cutaneous sensation. Pain, temperature, touch, pressure receptors in the skin provide information about the external environment, and this is very important for homeostasis. Excretion and absorption. Excretion is the removal of waste products, and as I said before, the skin has a very minor role in excretion, but it has a bigger role in absorption. Many substances, especially if they're lipid soluble, are absorbed by the skin, and this is the basis for skin patch delivery of medications. You simply make the medication lipid soluble and it just dissolves right into the skin. Also, vitamin D formation. Vitamin D is involved with the regulation of calcium and phosphorus levels in the body. Its precursor is formed on the surface of the skin upon exposure to sunlight, and then that precursor is absorbed into the body, travels to the liver and kidney, where it is converted into active vitamin D, also called calcitriol, which is a hormone. Now let's talk about wound healing. There's two kinds of wound healing processes that can occur depending on the depth of the injury. In epidermal wound healing, which would involve just the epidermis, So here is a little area of damage. What happens is some stratum basale cells detach from the basement membrane and migrate into the area. They are giving rise to new cells which get pushed up, filled with keratin and dye. So it's a very simple process. Deep wound healing occurs when the injury extends below to the dermis and subcutaneous layer. You may get some loss of function and development of scar tissue, and fibrosis is the term for scar formation. You basically have 4 phases. The inflammatory phase, where blood clot forms and you have inflammation in the tissue. The second phase would be the migratory phase, where the clot becomes a scab and a very delicate type of connective tissue called granulation tissue comes and fills the wound. It provides a framework on which to repair the tissue. The next stage is the proliferative phase, where there's extensive growth of the tissue beneath the scab, and lastly, the maturation phase, where the scab sloughs off and the tissues become more organized. In this figure, we see 2 of the stages of deep wound healing. We see the first one, this is C because it was part of a figure that included the last line. But here we can see the blood clot forming and inflammation occurring underneath that blood clot. And eventually, maturation phase, this scab will fall off and the tissues underneath will become more organized. A few words about burns. Burn is tissue damage caused by a number of different types of events. And burns destroy some of the skin's important contributions to homeostasis. Remember that your skin is your protection against microbial invasion and also desiccation, and it's also has a big role in thermoregulation. Burns are graded according to their severity. A first-degree burn includes only the epidermis. It's characterized by mild pain and redness, but no blisters and the skin functions remain intact. A second-degree burn is always characterized by blistering. So here we're involving the epidermis and some of the dermis. So some skin functions are lost. You get the redness, the blister formation, edema, which is swelling, and pain. A third degree burn is a full thickness burn. It destroys the epidermis, the dermis, and the subcutaneous layer, and maybe even tissue below that. Most skin functions are lost, and the region is numb because sensory nerve endings have been destroyed. It's also dry because sweat glands and oil glands have also been destroyed. Whenever you hear a doctor describing the extent of burns, this burned over so much % of their body, what they're doing is using the rule of 9s. That is what's used to estimate the surface area of an adult affected by a burn. And when the burn is over 70% of the body, over half the victims die. But if you look, the rule of 9s says that different parts of the body, different areas of the body can be looked at as 9% of total area, fractions of 9%, or multiples of 9%. So you can see here the anterior trunk is 18%, 2 times 9. Each of the anterior part of our upper limbs, 4.5%, half of 9%. Anterior thighs, 9%, 9%, 9%, 9%. Okay, so that is how it works. You don't have to know much about the development of the integumentary system, but I think it is worth a look. If you remember, we had said that around in the hair follicle, you have the hair, and it's surrounded by an epithelial root sheath surrounded by a dermal root sheath. Okay, so this shows that at some point in fetal development, the stratum basale is going to dive down to form a hair follicle. And so these are basically epidermal cells, and you can see surrounding is the dermis. Aging in the integumentary system causes many changes. Wrinkles develop, dehydration and cracking occur, sweat production, actually that should be decreases. Sweat production decreases in the as you get older, making it harder to thermoregulate. There's an increase in the number of functional melanocytes in certain areas, which form age spots, but a decrease. Again, I should correct this. There's a decrease in the number of functional melanocytes in hair, and so you get not so much melanin deposited in hair, but more melanin deposited in different areas of the skin, resulting in those age spots. Subcutaneous fat is lost, and there's a general decrease in skin thickness, and the nails may also become more brittle. And that is the end of chapter 5.